My name is Rick Archer, and my guest this week is Doc Roberts from Durango, Colorado. Doc has an interesting story, which you'll hear. His awakening occurred in a way which most of us would probably choose to let this cup pass from me. He pretty much died, and then he had an awakening. But I'll let him tell the details. So, Doc, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And let's start as we usually do with just a little biographical sketch, where you're from, what you do, things like that, so people get a feeling of just your life in a relative sense, and then we'll kind of get more into the meat of it.
Okay. Well, I live in Colorado, outside Durango. I have a couple internet businesses that I run, and I have 2 kids.
Making skis.
Making skis.
Ski boards.
Ski boards. I also have a vocational counseling website that I do, and do some teaching and speaking around the area.
Vocational type teaching?
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
Cool.
Then I have 2 kids and live in the woods.
So I'm envious. In fact, Doc told my wife about his circumstances, and she went right in the other room and started looking on the internet at real estate in his town. So you have you like learned TM years ago or something?
1970.
1970, and did it regularly for what, a decade or a couple decades?
A couple decades at least.
And you became a teacher also?
Teacher, governor.
Yeah.
Yeah, went through the whole process.
Governor means like an advanced teacher, sort of.
Yeah.
And then as you were doing all that, what was your orientation to spirituality? Did you feel like enlightenment is a million miles away? Were you having great experiences? Were you a seeker?
I was having typical experiences. I've been a seeker since I was 5.
Uh-huh.
Meditating. I started spontaneously meditating when I was 5.
Huh.
Was meditating.
You would actually just sit and meditate?
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. Up until I learned TM, pretty much.
Wow. So pretty regular, like almost every day?
Yeah. I was actually in competitive roller skating. I was a national champion for many years. And part of the regimen was to practice 8 hours a day.
Wow.
So I would just immediately go right into the transcendent for like 8 hours, not know what happened.
So you'd just be in the zone while you were practicing?
Yeah, for 7 days a week.
Competitive means like dancing type or racing? Or
figure skating.
Figure skating on roller skates?
Yeah.
Interesting. Huh. Jumping and twirling and...
No, I did the circles on the floor,
Oh.
which is kind of intricate and very precise.
And it's all very competitive, and there's national champions and stuff.
Yep.
Huh. Very interesting.
Just a little minute move,
Yeah.
and you're out and they're in.
Yeah. So did you do like a type of meditation at all where you would sit and close your eyes and go deep, or was it more like that your roller skating put you into a meditative kind of place?
It was meditation in action, more like
Yeah.
Zen mindfulness.
Huh. And then what led you to decide to learn TM?
Saw a poster. They said, "Hey, for $35, we'll get you enlightened in 5 years," and I signed up.
That was in Colorado also, or somewhere else?
No, that was in Long Island.
Ah, I'm from that area.
I was going to school there.
Yeah, I'm from Connecticut.
Oh, okay.
Originally. And so when you learned to meditate, TM style, did it kind of like really knock your socks off, or was it like more like, hey, I've been doing this since I was 5?
No, it was definitely a clear transcending. It was very powerful for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess on another level, I really knew this is it.
Yeah.
This is what's going to get me where I want to be. I knew there was always something that was missing, some kind of secret that these masters knew.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to know what that was. So.
Yeah. And so you started meditating. Did you feel like you were kind of getting a glimpse of that?
Yeah. Yeah. Pretty periodically. Yeah.
Yeah.
You drop into the transcendent. You have those experiences, and you come back into your daily life. I can't wait to get back there again.
Yeah. But did you also feel over time that, it was beginning to stick? In other words, it wasn't like you went back to absolutely the way you had been when you got into daily life. Something of the transcendent was brought into activity?
Life was improving, I'd
Yeah.
say. Life was getting a little bit, I wouldn't say easier. It was more enlivened.
Mm-hmm. And you taught TM like full time for a while?
Yep.
Whereabouts?
Florida.
Oh,
Yeah.
my wife taught in Florida too, Daytona Beach,
Oh, I was in
around the Merv Wave,
Yeah, me too.
Oh.
St. Petersburg.
St. Petersburg.
So I was there a couple of years, and I went.
By the Merv Wave, incidentally, I mean that in 1975, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi went on the Merv Griffin show, and huge numbers of people started learning TM. 50,000 people a month, lined up around the block. So we
Yep.
call it the Merv Wave.
Yep. That was a good time.
Yeah, I was over in Switzerland with Maharishi at that point, but I'd already done much teaching. So, all right. So then you were teaching full time, and at a certain point, you probably thought like, well, I better get a life and get a job and start to, hold down some responsibilities. You got married.
Yeah, well, first I went on the 6-month course, and after the 6-month course, I had a brainstorm to get my master's degree.
Oh. 6-month course, by the way, are these courses that TM teachers did where they would do long meditations for 6 months, and sometimes they'd put the courses back to back and be doing long meditations. By long, I mean, pretty much all day long for, a year and a half, some people did. And so you did one of those.
Did
Then
one
you
of
got a
those.
master's degree.
Went to Amherst, then moved from there to Fairfield when they were just starting the
Yeah, I did
community,
that too. Uh-huh.
starting to build the domes,
Right.
that whole thing. So, but yeah, I had gone. Let's see, I can't remember now if I went to college first or moved to Fairfield first. Then went to college, but
Huh.
either way, I ended up, going to college, starting a practice,
What'd you do your master's degree in?
vocational counseling.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And you moved to Fairfield, did a practice here in that?
I actually kind of started a practice here, so yeah, I guess I did it right after the 6-month course before I went to Amherst and
Mhm.
came here.
And then what?
Then I was getting a little bit burned out on Fairfield and not having a wife and kids and a
Mhm.
real life.
Yeah.
So
You went
So I
finding
went to-
eligible candidates around here.
yeah, so I went to California to start my private practice and seminars, and then met my wife, and then went from there.
Mhm.
Eventually moved to Colorado, which is where I wanted to be.
Yeah. And right to Durango then, or something?
Boulder.
Boulder, okay. And then eventually you moved down to Durango.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that was a quick survey. I'm sure there's some interesting details along the way, but and then if it's the next appropriate thing to tell in the story, I understand you had a health crisis.
Well, to backtrack just a bit, I was finishing my PhD. It was in psychology of human potential, and I was also starting a new business, which was something completely
So that's
different.
why you called Doc. You have a PhD.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I started a business with ski boards, and that just started taking off, overcoming the house, and that was part of the decision to move to Bayfield for cheaper warehouse space. And,
You were building the ski boards in your house, more or less?
no, but we were shipping, we were
Oh, doing all
ordering.
that
I was
stuff, yeah.
representing a lot of other companies.
Yeah.
So we moved in 2001 there, and I'd say that was the beginning of the dark night of the soul.
And Bayfield is just a suburb of Durango.
Kind of. It's 18 miles out of
18
town.
miles out of town. And ski boards, by the way, you can describe them better than I can.
Well, there's two of them. They're short. There's almost no learning curve. They're super fun right from the beginning. I call it instant skiing, instant fun.
Mhm.
So
They're wider.
they're a little bit wider than regular narrow skis,
Yeah.
but they're shorter, so most people that can stand on their feet without wobbling can get on these and start having fun
Yeah.
without lessons.
And do even fairly advanced skiers enjoy them, or
Yeah, they do.
They just rather go for the old kind, regular.
Well,
kind?
they do, but then they find they can go through moguls like they never did before. They can go
Oh.
through trees that they couldn't do.
Yeah.
They can go on steep stuff. They go in powder. They can.
That's interesting.
So it opens up a whole. new-
Yeah. I mean, I totally lose it when I get into some moguls, and I don't ski that much. But when I get the
Yeah.
chance, I'm good on smooth stuff. But if I
Right.
get in the moguls, it's like, ugh.
Yeah, moguls are made for ski boards. You can
Yeah.
play in them.
Cool.
Ride the sides and all that.
And you have a website like skiboards.com.
Skiboards.com. Yeah.
Cool. Well, we'll link to that from backapp.com
Cool.
also. Okay, so the Dark Knight. Dum da dum dum.
I don't know if I need to go into too much
No, you
details.
should. Let's talk about
Well,
it.
it's kind of like everybody else's big dark night. The bad partner. Sent me reeling.
Bad partner means the marriage was.
I brought a partner into
Oh,
my
a business partner. I see.
which was a disaster. At that point, my health was starting to get affected.
Mm-hmm.
My
By the
wife was
stress
starting
of
to get a little
everything.
bit annoyed with the company.
Yeah.
The finances were kind of up and down. We had 2 young children at that point.
Yeah.
So all of that, there's just a lot of pressure.
Uh-huh.
And then that kept building and building, and a few other things came. Dog died, got disinherited by my father. Just pile it all on. Why?
Yeah.
Why not? So then it just didn't work out with my wife and I. She left, and my health was starting to decline. The divorce wasn't fun.
Do you feel like it was because of the stress of all these circumstances that your health was going under?
Yeah, definitely. All of that. The divorce, the business.
Yeah. Were you still meditating?
Kind of a little bit here and there.
But yeah, it was coming at you so much that you'd sort of drifted away from that a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, did it sort of reach a climax of some kind?
It did about 3.5 years ago, which is when we decided to break up.
Uh-huh.
Then my health started going down a little bit. The business started having problems. I couldn't keep up with the business.
Yeah.
So more and more and more and more. And so pretty much I lost my wife. I almost lost my company. Spent all my money on the divorce, the legal problems. And then most of my savings in the divorce went to her so I could keep the house for the kids.
Mm-hmm.
And then my health was declining rapidly to the point where my cardiologist one day, I had a blockage in my lung. And so he said, your heart is having trouble moving fluids.
What kind of a blockage? Just
Blood clots.
Really?
My lung.
And they couldn't take them out, or?
They could.
Oh, okay.
So he said, here's your options. You got
Yeah.
3 options. You can either have a heart and lung transplant
Mm-hmm.
if you wait. You can get this experimental surgery in San Diego, or you're going to die.
Right.
He said, and that's.
And wasn't
that's
there a danger of these clots breaking loose and causing a stroke or something?
Well, they're already in the lungs, but yeah, they could move and then really clog.
Clog
You know,
something
clog it up.
serious. Yeah.
But it was clogged enough that I just barely managed to get on a train, bought a one-way ticket, signed over everything, put it all in a trust for my kids.
Mm.
When I got there, my friend drove me to the hospital, and I gave her everything else that I had, my shoes, my money, my laptop. So I was essentially in the hospital alone.
Expecting never to come out.
Yeah, and the experimental surgery was fairly experimental, so I didn't know,
Yeah.
whether I was going to make it or not. And then right before I even got in the operating room, I remember I was starting to have trouble breathing, and then I just remembered my last breath, and that was it.
Hmm.
I was
Did you
gone.
pass out, or did they put some anesthesia on you?
No, there was no anesthesia.
Really?
I hadn't gotten to that
So
point.
you went out, and you went unconscious, and somehow they kind of kept you alive and started operating on you.
They tried the electric
Shocks.
shocks. Yeah,
The
that didn't
paddles.
work. So then they had to massage my heart and bring me back.
Open
Yeah.
your chest and massage it.
Yeah.
Wow. So they brought you back.
Yeah. So a heart
But
massage.
you didn't know
is,
you were brought back. You were out of there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Heart massage is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Not many people get that.
Yeah, really. But were you having any kind of out of body experience or near death experience or anything like that, or were you just gone?
No, it was pretty much. I didn't get all the flashy stuff that everybody else got.
Hmm.
I just went straight into what I knew was pure consciousness.
Oh, so you were conscious in a sort of unmanifest, non-specific, non-perceptual way. There was just consciousness there.
Yeah, there wasn't me there. It was
Right.
just consciousness, just eternal. You could call it a number of names. Love, peace, being.
Right. Well, actually, at that time, while they were massaging your heart and all that stuff, was consciousness aware of itself, or did you realize when you came out of the whole thing that consciousness had been awake in the throughout the ordeal?
It's hard to say because when you're kind of outside of time and space, you're just there,
Yeah.
and so you don't know how. I mean, I didn't know how long. It just seemed like it was.
You're just dwelling
eternal.
in that eternity.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was no thought saying, "Oh boy, this is fun." It was just like,
There was no witness. I mean,
Right.
there was no me looking. Wow, look at me. I'm in this state.
Huh.
Yeah, it was only afterwards that I came back and I knew what had happened.
yeah. So obviously the operation was successful, or we wouldn't be having this interview.
Yeah.
So was it a long operation? Do you know?
It was 12 hours.
12 hours. And how long did it take you to come out of the anesthesia?
2 weeks. Well, they
So
kept me in a
They
coma.
kept you in a coma
for 2 weeks. Yeah.
Okay. And and as far as you know, that pure awareness was there during that 2 weeks?
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Can't say for sure.
And so you...
I didn't exist anymore.
Right. Just awareness.
Just awareness.
Yeah.
That's all there was.
And so then you finally came out, and
At first, I remembered that experience. I think about the first thing that came to me was this. It was almost like a feeling of love just coming over me,
huh,
and it was kind of not. It was not verbal, but it was. Everything is okay.
uh-huh.
Everything is perfect. All is good, and everything that happens in life is for your highest.
Mhm.
So basically, there's no need to fear. There's no need to be concerned. There's no need to ever
Yeah.
worry again.
It seems like even when you talk about that, you get a little emotional.
Yeah,
That you just feel moved by it
very moving. Yeah,
because you felt like sort of a blessing or something.
I felt all the remnants of stress in my body just
Dissipate.
dissipate.
Huh.
Yeah, including my first chakra. No fear of survival, no fear of death any longer,
Hmm.
because I was dead.
Yeah,
essentially.
done that.
Yeah, done that. Not much to it. Fun to be back. Even though I was in the ICU, I just kept thinking, wow, I could just stay here the rest of my life, and this would be really cool.
Uh-huh.
So,
And so you came out, and did you feel like a new man? I mean, did you feel like you had undergone this some kind of profound spiritual shift?
not yet. I knew something had happened. I was kind of back. I heard this vibration or this noise that was
Mhm.
coming, and finally I just started paying attention to it, and then they were calling my name to bring me
Yeah.
back to consciousness.
All right.
And then it took probably a couple days to kind of learn how to write and walk and speak, and
Uh-huh.
it was just kind of
Because
getting
you've
used.
been so out of it.
Just kind of get used to all these different things, but it all felt new. It all felt like the first time. The whole, like everything,
Really?
felt like the first time.
Not that you didn't know how to do those things. I mean, you remembered how to speak. You remembered how to brush your teeth. And
Yeah, the
you-
habits.
You knew people's names and stuff, but you felt like it was like all afresh. Just
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Hmm.
And then I was there. They
So
said,
like the conditioning had been wiped out, sort of. I mean, the sort of ingrained habit pattern, calcified ways of seeing and thinking and feeling and doing had been erased.
yeah, I'd say the hard drive was completely erased, and then
Uh-huh.
it was starting to reboot again,
Yeah,
little by little.
yeah.
I got to say, it was a great experience in the hospital.
Mhm.
I was, and I didn't sleep much because they're kind of in every half hour or something.
Right.
And that broke that habit. I didn't even feel like I needed sleep anymore.
Huh.
And they told me it'd take 2 months to get out. I'd be in there for 2 months, and within 2 weeks I was out.
Because you recuperated so fast.
I recuperated very fast.
Yeah.
And they kept calling me Miracle Man because they didn't understand that nobody had ever gone into the surgery and had died before they got into the operating room.
Yeah.
A lot of people die in the operating room.
Uh-huh.
And then the process was, once they got my heart going again, then the surgery, they'd stop your heart intentionally twice in a
To
row.
rehook things and
Yeah, for 20 minutes each. So
wow, had you on a machine, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah. Huh.
So yeah, it was quite. I'm glad I wasn't around watching all that.
Yeah.
Those people that hover over their bodies and watch all this, it's like, all power to you. But I'm
Yeah.
glad I didn't.
So, did you have so you got out of the hospital in 2 weeks, but were you still really, weak and needing a wheelchair or anything like that?
I was weak. When I was in the hospital that 2 weeks, they said, well, if you start walking around, you probably recover a little quicker.
Mm-hmm.
In their mind, it's walk around the hallway.
Yeah.
In my mind, I put all my equipment that was attached to me in a wheelchair, and I was out the front door, walking out in the parking lot,
Yeah.
sitting on the bench. It was great.
Huh. Interesting. And so then when you finally got out of there, obviously, you were free of equipment.
Yeah.
And then what? I guess you had to buy another train ticket back to Durango.
I stayed at my friend's for a couple weeks just so I could I still couldn't walk more than maybe a quarter of a block.
Right.
But then I started building my strength up, but when I was ready, I got on the train and went back.
Mm-hmm.
Got hit with my second dark night of the soul, which was interesting.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, in terms of external circumstances coming
Yeah.
at you?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Things.
Sometimes people say when they say dark night, they mean there's nothing particularly wrong on the outside, but they just feel like crap on the inside, and depression and everything is meaningless And
Yeah, that was the
that kind of
first. That
stuff.
was the first one.
Uh-huh.
The second one was more like, oh, so you're attached to this? Well, let's take
Yeah.
that away.
Rip.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So that was about a year process. And meanwhile, I was starting to realize there was something different.
Mhm.
When I got back home to my house, I just was looking around, going, oh, this person lives in this house, and oh yeah, they're interested in spiritual and psychology books. I could see them on the wall, and oh, they have 2 kids.
Yeah.
And have this business,
Uh-huh.
and just kind of
So you sort of reassembling your.
yeah. And so for probably, I don't know, the first year, I kept thinking, well, I must be a walk-in or something. I must be,
Huh.
something's not the same anymore.
Yeah.
And so, now I understand that awakening was there.
Mhm.
I guess you could call it the awakened one took over.
Yeah. The
but-
self
but-
with a capital S.
Yeah, so I wasn't, the small me wasn't there anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So everything was different, and yet
The small me
everything was,
wasn't there at all, or
Well,
there
the
was a bigger
habits-
me that
the
predominated.
habits were there.
Yeah.
Same habits, same thought patterns, same,
Mm-hmm.
responses.
Right.
But somehow I could just see them as a veil.
Yeah.
And all the time I kept feeling, especially for the first year, that wherever I was looking,
Mhm.
I could just see, like kind of in this movie Twister, when they have a tornado coming and it comes through the drive-in theater,
Uh-huh.
and everybody's watching this movie, and all of a sudden the screen cracks,
Uh-huh.
as the tornado comes through. That's
Yeah.
what it felt like. It felt like, wow, any moment this whole thing could crack apart,
Huh.
and there'd be what's the only thing there is being.
Yeah.
He's sitting right there,
So you kind of
Nothing-
felt like everything was just a sort of a facade or
like a movie.
like a movie.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It didn't have the same kind of reality that it once had had.
No, not that there aren't thoughts that have come over the last 2 years that have grabbed me for a while,
Yeah.
and I kind of got sucked in, and I had to,
Mm-hmm.
deal with those. But there's a certain, I hate to use the word detachment because that sounds
Cold.
cold, yeah.
Yeah.
But there was a certain like, oh, okay, well here's a bill from the IRS for $6,000. And I'd like, okay, I really don't want this. And,
Yeah.
I'd have the thought patterns come up, and then it's like, I just dealt with it. And
Yeah.
moved on.
So in other words, things don't have the gravity they used to have. They don't have the capacity to grip you as they once did.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even though they might grip momentarily, they can't keep a grip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now in the beginning, of course, it was coming at me, and I go, oh well, for probably the first 3 months, I was just sitting on the deck listening to the birds,
Mhm.
just like, oh, I just want to do this. So
Yeah.
I'd get a bill, a couple bills would come in, and I'd just throw them in a box for about 3 months, and then finally people started calling, and then some lady called. She said, well, you owe this much money for the hospital bill, and they said if you don't pay it today, we're gonna
Take your heart back.
we're gonna call the credit bureau, and
Yeah.
and it's gonna ruin your credit.
Did you have insurance, health insurance?
I did, but there were a lot of bills
Still a
that
lot of
didn't
bills,
get paid.
sure.
So, and I remember myself going, just for a moment, it was like, oh, my credit, and then it was like, and I just kind of it relaxed, and I just said to her, okay.
Yeah.
So my credit went down, and it's like, wow, what a relief. Now I don't have to think about it. I've thought about that my whole life.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I better watch out. I better,
Yeah.
and it's like, oh, well, that's gone.
Hmm.
So it was kind of like that for the first year. And meanwhile, I was trying to figure out what had really happened.
Yeah.
Because I remember calling some people, especially John Macy and a few other people, and just saying, I came here in October,
Mhm.
trying to get in touch with people who might know what was happening.
Yeah.
And I remember all of them saying, well, that's awakening.
Right.
I'm like, that can't be awakening.
Hmm.
That doesn't sound like cosmic consciousness. That doesn't sound like
Yeah.
unity or GC or all the things that I imagined it should be. But the message kept coming back, simplest form of awareness.
Hmm.
And it was kind of like, well, what'd you think simple awareness was?
Right.
Did you think it
Yeah.
was
You had a
some big
concept
thing?
of it. Yeah.
And so all of a sudden it hit me, and it was like, oh, this is it? That's it?
Huh.
And even though everything felt like it had changed completely, nothing had changed. Everything was the same.
Mhm.
So it was a kind of strange duality. But that sense of, am I awake? And then I start doubting. It's like, well, no, this can't be it.
Mm.
And I'd go back and forth for a while, and then eventually it just kind of seeped in. Probably, I'd say it probably took a year
Mm-hmm.
before I just finally just like, yeah,
Yeah.
this is it.
Did you were you reading any of your old spiritual books to see if what they said jived with what you were experiencing?
You know, it's funny. It's a good question because when I looked at all my spiritual books, I couldn't bear to pick them up.
Just
There was only one that I hadn't read, which is Jack Kornfield's book. I think it's
after the ecstasy of the laundry. Or something?
yeah, that's what it was. And I found myself flipping through all the chapters till about halfway through or so, until it finally started making sense to me.
Yeah.
And then about a month, I think about a couple months later, I went to visit my friend in Boulder, and he was really into Adyashanti.
Uh-huh.
And so he was running late, and I found his book, Emptiness Dancing. I started reading that with tears flowing out of my eyes, because it was like, oh my God, this guy knows,
Yeah.
he knows my experience.
Yeah.
So I got kind of turned on to Adyashanti and maybe a couple of his books.
Mhm.
But other than that, no, I couldn't find any books that I
Hmm.
really related to anymore.
But you kind of felt that talking to people who were awake was helping you more than books.
Yeah.
Okay. And did you find some of those elsewhere, or mostly in Fairfield?
Fairfield, but also even my friend had been following Adyashanti, and they gave me a tape
Yeah.
to listen to on the way back to Durango, which was The End of Your World,
Right.
and all the what the process of awakening really is, and all the things that are going to probably hit you afterwards,
Mhm.
and all of that was making sense. So,
Yeah.
so more and more it was kind of seeping in,
Right.
that this is what it was, and definitely I related to the cosmic joke.
Mhm.
As soon as I got it, it's like, what?
Yeah.
That's it? This is it? And I remembered like, well, I've had this since I was a kid. I just didn't know that
Didn't
was
know what
it.
It was. Yeah.
Yeah. So I laughed for a really long time when I kind of got that.
And you had it when you were a kid, but obviously you got mired in the pressures of the world and the responsibilities and
Yeah.
the dramas to the point where you pretty much forgot it.
Yeah, you
You know.
totally lose it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then this kind of crisis reminded you, or enabled it to come to the surface again.
I know it kind of sounds extreme to die to get, awakened, but for me it was much more of a blessing because I have a very analytical mind, and
Yeah.
if I had been, meditating and then it kind of, dawned on me, I'd totally doubt it.
Yeah.
It'd be too subtle. This was like night and day.
Dying
Died,
for you.
came back,
Yeah.
different person.
I guess we could modify the saying in your case to say, whatever sinks your boat.
Yeah, whatever works.
Yeah. Huh. So really, it's the sort of the confidence in it is relatively new for you. Just a year or so, maybe. It sounds like.
Yeah, it's my anniversary was of the old me dying was July 24th, and July 25th was my rebirth,
Of what year?
2008.
Oh, and that's when you had the operation, or that was like a year after the operation?
No, July 24th, 2008 is when I actually died,
Physically.
and then the operation
Yeah.
coming through it was July 25th when I actually.
Oh.
I call that.
So
when
that's
I-
really
when
only
I
2
woke
years
up.
ago.
It's just barely 2 years.
Yeah. Okay. It's funny. I just had my July 25th is my anniversary of learning to meditate.
Oh.
When I was 18, so that just happened for us.
Huh.
Yeah. So now I get the sense that your business is doing okay again.
Yeah,
Yeah.
actually, everything is kind of turned around.
Everything's kind of coming back together.
Well, the funny thing
Credit
is,
score is going up.
I don't know about that.
That may take a
I
while.
don't really care.
Yeah.
But it seemed like, something in not being attached
Mhm.
to the outcome.
Yeah.
Everything just kind of flows however it's going to flow.
Yeah.
And it seems like it's always beneficial. And I remember those words when I first came to consciousness, that everything is perfect.
Mhm.
There's nothing to be concerned about, nothing to worry about. It's you're loved, and you're always it's for your highest good. So then all the things that were starting to come at me and continue to come at me,
Mhm.
I see it as a blessing.
Yeah.
Even though I would say, well, I don't like this. Can't it come this way?
Right.
But still it comes how it
It's God's
comes.
blessing, yeah.
Yeah, but there's something in that lack of attachment
Mhm.
that makes it so much more easy.
Yeah. Well, there's so many sayings, both in contemporary culture and in ancient literature, like let go and let God.
Yeah.
Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all else shall be added unto thee.
Yeah.
The Gita says, what is it? Be not attached to the fruits of action, and all sorts of things like that. So it's every culture has realized this.
Right.
And I think what people often do is they try to just adopt an attitude of that, and maybe that helps a little bit. But what you're experiencing is, in a really sort of deep, visceral sense, being grounded in a state of non-attachment, or a state
Yeah.
of consciousness which, by its very nature, is not attached to phenomena, and therefore you're kind of in a place where, I'm putting words in your mouth, but you're kind of in a place where you can allow things to just flow freely. In fact, you probably don't have a heck of a lot of choice in the
No,
matter.
I wouldn't say you do, and I think Adyashanti is right that after awakening, the stakes are higher, and those things that you've been putting off, avoiding, not working on within yourself, they come at you a lot faster.
Yeah, a lot of people say that too, that if you haven't done your house cleaning, so to speak, you're going to have to do it after awakening. In fact,
Before or after.
some teachers say you better try to do as much of it as possible before, because you're not going to want to have to deal with the deluge of it that's going to come at you afterwards if you haven't done
Right.
it before.
Right. Although there is a little bit of it's nice to have that stuff come at you when you're feeling bliss,
Yeah,
as opposed to feeling like you're suffering.
it's true. I mean, you have the capacity to handle it much more readily.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I like the analogy of, if you tried to dissolve a spoonful of mud in a glass of water, it wouldn't go so well. But if you took that same mud and threw it in an ocean, it's gone.
Right.
You don't see it anyplace.
And there is a true sense of, it's odd, awakening kind of has this connotation, but for me, I just feel awake, so that everything I look at, I can make quicker decisions.
Huh.
And I can just look at what matters, what doesn't matter. I went, when I got back to Bayfield, I had a retail shop as well,
Mm-hmm.
and I went in there, and within like 1 minute, it was like, no, I'm done with this.
Yeah.
And it was done,
Right.
even though I had been in that shop for 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also a crystal clarity about time,
Mm-hmm.
how valuable it is,
Mm.
and how close. I guess you could call it awakening. I could also call it death. It's
Right.
like right here.
Oh, yeah.
It's right around us,
Uh-huh.
and that veil between life and death is so thin.
Yeah.
To me, it felt like, well, if I just close my eyes, I'm
Keep
in
going.
death.
Yeah.
It's that close. So that sense of time, where I want to put my attention, what I want to have in terms of my time, the quality of life
Mm-hmm.
has dramatically improved, actually.
Yeah. Amma, the hugging saint, always says that, our next breath could be our last. And she doesn't mean that in a morbid sense. She's not trying to scare people. But she says we should be like a bird that's perched on a twig and ready to just fly anytime the twig breaks. And, and that in itself, those metaphors kind of imply non-attachment and
Yeah.
a sort of freedom and spontaneity and all.
I have, certainly in my life, on my spiritual path, embraced all, those teachings,
Yeah.
and tried to,
Try to
emulate
live by
them,
them, right.
and live by them, and all the kind of, I wouldn't call them rules, but they're, certain
Yeah.
paradigms that you have to follow, and it really, it's like, well, do it or don't do it, but it's not really going to make any difference until you awaken, and then you understand,
Yeah.
attachment, well,
Right. It's an important point because a lot of times, perhaps more often than not, descriptions of this state are mistaken as prescriptions for attaining it. You know, and people read books or they hear teachers, and this kind of state is described, and then they try to, as you said, emulate. They try to sort of
yeah,
be that way or act that way, and and it's putting the cart before the horse, I think.
Yeah.
You know, and it may actually be may actually be detrimental, counterproductive. I don't know. I mean, there's
Yeah.
something to be said for having one's attention on this kind of thing and remembering it and all, but ultimately, you know, so it's not that one should just sort of forget it all and just drive a truck and that's it. But you know, like you yourself did spiritual practices for 20 years or something before you had this critical juncture.
Well, let's see, yeah,
More
probably
than 20.
30, well, since I was 5, so.
Yeah,
Long
40
time.
years or more.
Yeah.
And if you hadn't done that, I suspect the outcome would have been different. You may very well not have had that awakening that you had as it came through the surgery. Although there are exceptions to everything
Yeah.
one can say, and some people probably would have had it. But
Who knows?
Yeah.
All I could say is I was so stubborn that it probably took death to wake me
well, it
up.
was the final sort of prying loose.
Yeah.
You know, you'd been chipping away at it for a long time.
You know, I've always heard that really what allows awakening to dawn is letting go
Yeah.
of your ego, letting go of, well, I let go of everything.
Yeah.
Everything was gone.
And you couldn't have done it voluntarily, I guess. I mean, you couldn't have, if someone had said to you a few weeks before your crisis, you know, okay, just let go, you know. You would have said, well, how? I can't, you know.
Right.
Or you would have tried and not been able to do it.
Yeah.
So it's not so much a volitional thing. And that, again, you hear people talking like that, you know, oh, just let go, don't be attached, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And it must be, it either must frustrate people, or it must sort of put them into a kind of a manipulative state where they're trying to let go, or you know,
Yeah.
making a mood of letting go, and you know, saying or making themselves kind of aloof in their personality, like, oh, I don't really care about anything, you know,
Yeah.
and nothing matters, and all that stuff. But it's kind of like painting the roses red, you know, Alice in Wonderland thing. It's not red
Right.
roses, it's painted roses.
Right.
The roses have to be red from the inside naturally.
I had a lot of people when my health was starting to go down,
Mhm.
you know, remind me of the Abraham teachings,
Mhm.
and you know, if you change your vibration, then you'll get a different result.
Mhm.
And it obviously didn't work. But to me, looking back now, I go, that's just ego manipulation. That's just the spiritual ego has got a hold of you, and it's like, well, look at me, I'm so pious, I'm so, you know, spiritual, I'm so, and that's no different than just the regular ego.
Yeah.
It's just it's the same, although it's more elusive because you feel like, well, now I'm spiritual now.
Right.
So
Yeah, that's a good point.
none of that happened, and when people ask me, they say, well, was it because you had the right vibration, and you know, no, it wasn't what I was thinking. It's like my thoughts are just whatever they are, you know. It wasn't my thoughts, it wasn't, if anything, there was a deep, deep knowingness that I wasn't in touch with, that everything was okay. And that's when I came back out, that was the message that I got
Yeah.
from myself, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know from where.
Because it had been such a breaking of boundaries for you to have gone through that. I mean, it just and yeah, as we've been saying, you had been preparing the ground for that for decades, but it was the final kind of breakthrough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And after that, I was out in the parking lot in my hospital gown, bare feet, because I didn't have any shoes, didn't have any money, didn't have anything, just
Yeah. Huh.
glad to be alive and glad to be out in the sun.
I kind of a little while ago, as we were talking, and you were talking about the sort of transformation you underwent, and how you know, you had a lot of stuff hit the fan after your awakening that you had to deal with. It sort of made me think of the world at large, because I sort of feel like the whole of humanity is kind of on a larger scale following the same trajectory as an individual does, in a way, as they go through their individual spiritual unfoldment. And you know, with all the whole thing of working stuff out and purification and so on, and that if there is a mass awakening, if there is a sort of a dramatic shift in the entire global consciousness, which many people feel is very much underway, then it will be good to have worked out a lot of stuff before it hits, because otherwise it could be too cataclysmic to have to work it out abruptly. and people who aren't at all prepared for that shift would find it sort of difficult to weather. And I think, in large part, that's what a lot of the spiritual teachers who've been around for decades now, coming from India to the West or wherever, have been doing, whether explicitly or not. They've been kind of preparing the ground, preparing the way for this transition that we're about to undergo, or that we're in the midst of undergoing. And that may be wishful thinking and so on, but there's certainly a lot of people who think that that's what's happening.
Well, it's hard for me to say, but I would say yes.
Yeah.
There is a lot happening. I see more people awakening.
Mm-hmm.
So something's happening, because there's more awakening now than there probably has been in the whole history of humankind.
Yeah. One of my guests a few months ago used the example of the Buddha and saying it was as though he had to pierce through a very thick membrane to get his awakening, because there was just so much inertia. And now so many people have pierced that membrane that it's a lot thinner and a lot easier to pierce. And that, a lot of people are awakening much more readily now than ever before.
Yeah, although I know some people that I would say they've awakened,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't know it. They don't even know what awakening is.
Yeah.
So tapes like this really help people to understand, oh, that's what happened to me.
Yeah. Well, that was one of my motivations in doing this show, is that, I live in a town where several thousand people have been meditating for decades, and I think there are a lot of people walking around who have, for all intents and purposes, awakened. But there's, like you said, there's a sort of an ingrained habit way of thinking and acting and seeing the world, and they're not all going to have open heart surgery. So, if somehow hearing person after person after person tell their story, if they can recognize something in each person's story, or maybe in one person's story that resonates with them, maybe it will trigger a realization. Maybe they'll feel like, oh, he's talking about what I actually have, and I didn't realize that what I have is that I was looking for. And he didn't realize it either. And after a year of, sorting things out, he did realize it. So, hey, maybe I've got something here. Maybe these 40 years of meditation have actually paid off, and I don't have to sort of give up and just feel like it's never going to happen for me.
I think there is definitely a knowledge component.
Yeah.
It almost when you just get this little twist in your knowledge, and you go, oh, that's what that is.
Yeah.
That's what that means. That's what unity consciousness is. I didn't know that that's what it was.
I was listening to a lecture just the other night by Jerry Jarvis, who was one of the founders of the TM movement, and he was saying that experience leads to knowledge, but knowledge leads to enlightenment. Huh.
Yeah, that makes total sense,
Yeah.
because you can have the experience. Anyway, I definitely find that at this point, it's not like there's going to be more awakening.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm going through now is this process of understanding what's already taken place.
Yeah.
And watching these clouds come over, the Velcro thoughts that Adyashanti calls them, that grab me, and then I can kind of look at them so that the sun comes back out. So
Mm-hmm.
there's times when those things will come, but with a lot more clarity.
Yeah. Let's pause for a second. We're going to change tapes, I think. We just took a little break. My name is Rick Archer. I'm talking with Doc Roberts from Durango, Colorado, skiboards.com, who had a rather dramatic awakening a couple of years ago. Dramatic in the sense that it occurred, I don't know if we can say as a result of, but somehow or other in conjunction with open heart surgery and almost dying and so on.
Well, it was actually open lung surgery.
Open lung surgery.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
they also had to massage your heart.
To get me back to life, yeah. Surgery was actually to clear the blockage in my lungs.
Yeah. So they hadn't actually been planning on massaging your heart or
No.
even getting at your heart, but they had
No.
to keep you alive.
Yeah, they said that I was the only one that arrived that was dead before I got to the operation.
Wow.
And they said of all of those, I was the least likely to survive the operation. So
kind of like the high school kid who's least likely to succeed.
Yeah.
And you made it.
Yeah.
That's great. But it's sort of like you really took it right down to the wire, didn't you?
I certainly did. Yeah. Got it right down to the, like, taking my last breath.
Yeah. Huh. Amazing. Interesting story. So, what have we, is there any kind of particularly interesting area that we haven't covered yet that, you know, has been in the back of your mind or that you usually talk about with people when you talk about this stuff? Or?
Well, in the beginning, I did. When I came here, I just couldn't help talk about it.
Here to Fairfield.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I was starting to get the third degree. It's like, well, do you witness sleep?
Right.
You know, and then I was like, oh, well, no, I'm not witnessing sleep, so maybe this isn't it. So that was kind of leading to the doubt.
Well, you witnessed open heart surgery and open lung surgery.
Well,
I mean, that consciousness was there during that surgery, you know?
yeah, but I mean, I wasn't like watching myself, you know, being operated on.
Yeah, but I don't think that's what really is meant by witnessing sleep, you know, because witnessing sleep in that sense would mean that there's some little guy up here looking at something else over here,
Yeah.
and that there's sensory activity going on, and
Yeah,
perhaps even
yeah.
intellectual or mental activity, whereas in the truer sense of the term, I think witnessing sleep just means that, what you said, consciousness awake to itself,
Yeah.
irrespective of, you know, any awareness of body or anything else. It's not a functional, perceptual kind of thing. It's more a much more kind of grounded, ground state sort of awareness.
Yeah, well, I was a little bit confused, obviously, too, with my TM background.
Yeah.
Thinking, oh, well, witnessing means, you know, I've had dreams where I, like, watch myself dreaming. And
Yeah, like lucid dreaming.
yeah, and I figured that. But then eventually, you know, it was actually only a little while, and then I just, like, realized, it's like, well, wait a minute. When I was, you know, dead, I was fully alive. I was conscious.
Yeah.
There was a consciousness there.
Yeah.
And when I sleep, it's still there.
Right.
Not like I'm watching myself sleeping, and gosh, I'm glad I don't.
So bingo, you witnessed sleep. Congratulations. Put that one to rest.
So then what I really noticed was there's this ongoing, continuous sense of bliss.
Yes.
No matter what else is happening, there's always this bliss. Bliss to fall asleep, bliss to wake up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not a whoop-de-doo, you know, 3 cups of coffee, yeah kind of
No.
bliss. It's a quieter thing.
Yeah, it's very just subtle, but you just feel it in your body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. Even when the going gets rough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there may be times when you're driving and you're like, you know, in a tight situation. I may not
Right.
notice
You're
it.
just like focusing on that.
Focusing on whatever I need to.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's always there if I just want to relax into it.
Yeah. I sometimes like to use the analogy of, you know, both with consciousness or with even bliss, of like, you know, if there were a tone playing, and this is just an analogy, not any kind of literal thing. If there were a tone playing, you know, generally speaking, you wouldn't be sort of listening to the tone all the time because you'd be attending to whatever you're doing. You'd get used to the tone.
Right.
But if you chose to, at any point, you could listen. Oh yeah, sure, there's the tone. It's there all the time. You know, this continual frequency or whatever. And again, it's just an analogy. I'm not suggesting that in an awakened state you hear some kind of tone, but similar idea. I mean, there's this ground state of awareness, of bliss, and so
Yeah.
on. And it's not like you're just kind of, you know, walking around oohing and eyeing all day long or wallowing in it, but it's there. It's a kind of the
Yeah.
background or foundation of whatever else is going on.
Now, there was about 2 months after my operation, when I got back, that I had one of these, you know, what I would just call these zapper dreams.
Uh-huh.
And this man walked up to me in my dream, and he held my hand, and he looked at my eyes, and he said, "Be careful."
Uh-huh.
And
Who was the man?
as soon as I woke up, the name Adyashanti.
Ah.
And I knew it was
Did
Adyashanti.
it look like him with his shaved head?
I
and
didn't
his-
know Adyashanti.
Uh-huh.
I didn't know who he was. So,
Uh-huh.
so it was like, that's why it really stuck, because if it was Maharishi or any of the, I'd go, oh, well, that's just, you know, old stuff.
Yeah.
But this was new. This was like very real.
Mhm.
And so immediately, of course, I woke up and I went, well, who's he? And he can't be a spiritual teacher. Doesn't he know? There's nothing to be concerned about.
Yeah.
You don't have to be careful. But I got it. And so when I was skiing in the trees one day, I was noticing that I was just feeling all unbounded
Mhm.
with absolutely no fear of death.
Right.
And then the words came back. It's like, be careful.
Yeah.
You know, because to me, it was like, well, I could run into this tree and die, and
Yeah.
nothing would change.
End
So
up like Sonny Bono.
yeah, what would matter?
Right.
But so I took that. Yeah, that was. And so I've had a couple of dreams like that where they just kind of zap me,
Hmm.
and it shakes me up a bit.
Yeah.
When I wake up.
And if I were to interpret that, I would say that, awake people are a fairly valuable commodity in today's world, They can play a significant role, even if it's not a big, famous public role. But just having such people around in greater and greater numbers, I think helps the whole, the whole shift to take place.
Yeah.
So, we don't want you to go knocking your brains out against the tree or anything.
Well, the other thing was, it was kind of like, well, I've already been dead. I know what dead is like.
Yeah.
It's cool and everything, but there's not much going on there.
Yeah.
This is much more interesting.
At least at the stage you were at.
Yeah, I mean,
who knows what happens.
I don't know, but there's
Farther.
more. There's more interesting here. There's more,
Yeah.
stuff to do.
You
and-
can ski and
yeah, yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
Yeah. You said something interesting a while back where you said that you're not going to get any more awake, but maybe your knowledge will grow or something like that. And do you sort of feel, though, that there could actually be, like if you think of yourself as a reflector that is, reflecting consciousness, could there be a clarification still of the reflector where the reflection got brighter or clearer?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what I would say. More,
Yeah,
I'd probably use the word enlivening.
right.
It's not like I can get more awakening.
Well, it's not like consciousness itself is going to change, but
Yeah,
your ability
yeah.
to appreciate or live it. Or,
Yes.
Yeah. Kind of like, the sun's just going to be the sun, but the mirror could be cleaned and then it would reflect the sun more brightly or
Yeah.
something.
So now I see things that come to me, good or bad,
Mhm.
as those things that I want to look at and be with and process, because it's going to bring more of that, the joy of awakening.
Yeah.
It's going to open that up more.
Do you have a sense that whatever comes to you is what's meant to come to you and that there's some lesson inherent in it or some knowledge?
I do know there's a flow,
Mm-hmm.
and my desire is to be in that flow,
Mm-hmm.
because that's the most joyous.
Yeah.
So whatever, it's just kind of moving in this current. Now, the other part of me is, of course, the business person that says, well, but if it doesn't go the way I want it to, then I'll need to do this.
Yeah.
And so there's a little bit of conflict there, but I know ultimately what is true
Yeah.
is that there's always that flow,
Mhm.
and as similar to the birds and the butterflies and everything else in creation, they're all celebrating.
Yeah.
Always just being the joy of being alive. It's only us humans walking around going, well, as soon as I get this, then I'll be happy.
Right.
So it's
See-
letting go of that is interesting. I'm going to go on a little bit here
Sure.
because with money, I noticed it particularly because there's this, well, you got to have a plan, or you need to do some things to make money, or I need to accumulate it, have more in savings, so then I'll feel. Well, the interesting thing is the divine flow is all about now.
Yeah.
And so to let go into that is trust. Now, before I was trying to trust.
Mm-hmm.
Now I know what trust is, and I know what the surrender is. But it doesn't look like, oh, well, then you're going to have all this, all these things coming to you all the time. It looks like, here's what you need now.
Yeah. And the things may or may not come, but
Yeah, and
Prob-
they may or may not come.
probably if you're tending more fully to the now, they have a better chance of coming. Like you said, you walked into your retail store and you thought, I'm done with this.
Yeah.
Now, if you had hung on to the retail store because of some intellectual reason why you ought to hang on to it or something, it could have, could have ruined you or something, or it could have wasted a lot of money and time and energy and
Yeah.
distracted you from the thing that which could be more lucrative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there is a wisdom there, and that trust and surrender. I mean, those are kind of really overused words, so they don't capture the true essence of what it means to just let go into the flow.
Yeah.
Um,
Now, obviously, you're running a business, and sometimes you're faced with challenging situations. You must sort of have to really kind of apply yourself and weigh alternatives and make a tough decision and so on, or is it not that way?
No, it's still that way, but there is a underlying,
Sense of flow.
when something will just come at the right time.
Yeah,
And then it's a matter of recognizing it.
right.
And I don't always recognize it. To me, I ask for it in sets of 3. So if something comes, I'll listen. Comes the second time, I'll go, so maybe something's going on here.
Yeah,
The third time, it's like, okay, that's what I need to do.
I see.
So that's my direction.
Yeah, you don't wait to be hit over the head with a hammer. You say, okay, 3 hands.
I already did that.
Good enough. Yeah, you did that. Well, the guy I interviewed last week, Chuck Hillig, had this beautiful interpretation of "Row, Row, Row Your Boat." That song. And we could maybe go through it just briefly, but row, row, row your boat gently down the stream. There's the flow. But row, row, row your boat implies that you're not just sitting in the boat, letting the stream take you wherever it will, running into some branches off on the side or something. You're
Right.
actually, there is some direction, there is some initiative, but it's gently. You're not forcing it. You're not, breaking your arms paddling or going against the current or anything else.
Right.
Yeah, you're maybe steering around a rock here and guiding yourself there, and but there's a sort of there's a verse from the Vedas which I just came to mind, which was, "Be easy to us with gentle effort." Pretty much says the same thing. So, but the word gentle, and yet effort. It's not like we're just lying there with our mouth open waiting for food to fall into it. There has to be some effort.
Yeah.
But if you're kind of in tune with that flow, then it can be gentle and it can be easy.
Unless your mind is saying something else. And that's where the fine line is, because your mind could be going, well, yeah, but I don't know if that's going to work out, or I don't know if this, or maybe I should be doing this. And all that stuff, it's still
Yeah.
the old habits are there. So you can hear the voices. Although, I got to say, I'm relieved that I don't have as much thoughts as I used to, because they were constant.
Yeah.
But there is still that kind of thing where it's, it can pull you. Oh, well, you better do this, or you better do this, or
Mm-hmm.
and so that process, I think, at least for me, is one of just relaxing more and more into it,
Yeah.
and not necessarily liking what's coming. I can still say, well, I don't really like this challenge,
Mm-hmm.
but I know that it's right.
Yeah.
I know that's what I need. So it's different. There's a feeling of grace or love
Mm-hmm.
kind of permeates everything.
Yeah. Interesting. I hope you live a long time, because I hope that because I think it's such an adventure, and it's such a kind of it's an adventure. It's fun to see how life unfolds when you're
Yeah.
in this kind of flow thing.
Yeah.
I mean, every day's a joy, and pretty much, and but even if I think this way myself, wouldn't mind living to be 90 or 100 or something, just to see how it continues to develop. But on the other hand, if I die tomorrow, no biggie. You kind of take the long view, and
Right.
that if that's what's meant to happen, then it'll still be interesting. It'll still be an adventure.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to actually live life the way I used to in my mind think you should live life, which is, you only have this moment,
Yeah.
and you don't know what's coming next. And I feel like I wander sometimes in a world where everybody's all caught up in someday.
Mm-hmm.
And they're kind of, you can almost see them living in their future plans and their schemes and their illusions of, well, what am I going to do next? And, well, as soon as I get here, then I'm going to have this,
Yeah.
and missing life,
Yeah.
because it's only happening here.
That's what guys like Eckhart Tolle are so good at reminding people of. And, for some people, as we were saying earlier, it might not be so practical because they're really not living it, and it becomes a kind of a mental game. But I think for a lot of people, it can definitely shift them to a certain extent, or even a great extent, into actually living that way. I mean, there are many ways of going about it. There's an analogy that if you pull the leg of a table, the other legs will come along, and the whole table will come along. Or you can pull a different leg, and you get the same result. So there's so many things we can do, practices, knowledge, different ways of going about it that can facilitate this kind of understanding and experience. And I think people naturally gravitate toward the thing that's going to work for them.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, then they'll leave that and gravitate towards something else.
I think awakening is always unique.
Yeah,
You know, it just comes in many different forms.
it really does.
I remember Carlos Castaneda in his, or the, the teachings of Don Juan,
Mm-hmm.
and one of them that I remember was that, live your life as if death is right on your shoulder.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, in fact, I wrote that quote down at one
Yeah.
point. Yeah.
Yeah. And I, for the longest time, was I'd say the first 6 months after surgery,
Mm-hmm.
my kids have a game called Bugdom. And it's this little bug that goes through and does stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a bee that always follows this bug around. It doesn't do anything, but it's always there.
Uh-huh.
And that's what awakening felt like to me. It's like, well, there's this thing that's always there.
Yeah.
It never goes away.
Uh-huh.
But here I am doing this or doing this, but there it is.
Huh.
And it just kind of reminded me of that, because that was kind of the thing. It kind of like, well, you can project into the future and you can think of all these things, and then you can think of some memory in the past.
Mm-hmm.
But there's something about being right in the present moment that's very different from the experience of the future or the past.
Yeah.
And whatever else is present in this present moment is what it is. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
So, that kind of thought always stuck with me too. It's like, yeah, there's something here in the present that doesn't exist anywhere else.
Yeah.
And being in that simple form of awareness, there's always that presence
Mhm.
that's there.
True. Someone was quoting Eckhart Tolle today about him saying something about, people say the Romans lived 2,000 years ago. The Romans didn't live 2,000 years ago. The Romans lived in the now, just like we live in the now.
Right. Right.
No one lived 2,000 years ago. You can sort of look at it like that, but ultimately
Yeah.
time is a concept to measure eternity, and it's only ever the now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is interesting in this context of this discussion, because you're a living example of that. You're actually living that. That's your daily experience. Your moment to moment, constant experience.
Back to that idea of knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
I went to a group. It was about 2 months after I got back from surgery. It was a little group in Durango called the Consciousness Circle.
Mm-hmm.
And there's about 25 people there. They're all in a circle. And the facilitator said, okay, why don't we just go around the circle and just share what you do to stay in the present.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of went around, and I waited, and then it came to me. I was like, I didn't know what to say.
You don't do anything.
Oh, what else would I do? Where else would I go?
Right. Well, what could you do to get out of the present? Well,
Yeah, right. And it astounded me, and it astounded kind of everybody else, because they're all saying, well, I meditate, or I, breathe, or I,
Yeah.
all this stuff. And it was like, huh. And that dawned, and it was like, wow, there's, something's changed here.
Yeah.
That was still when I was kind of going through, what's happened.
Well, do you still meditate and stuff like that at all?
I do when I feel a need for rest. A
Mhm.
lot of times I feel sitting on my deck, just sitting there with my eyes open and just, watching the birds and the deer and all that feels to me the same.
Yeah.
But I'm able to take it all in this way.
Mm.
With my eyes closed, I'm kind of missing some things.
I see.
So, it's kind of whatever strikes me.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you ever feel like, or do you feel like you might ever be a teacher of some sort? Like have a little group and start talking to them or anything? Ever feel that impulse?
Yeah.
Do you?
I started a satsang in Durango,
Oh.
and then just got busy and stopped it. But
Uh-huh.
yeah, I get pulled in that direction.
How was that going when you had it?
Good. People were sharing their experiences,
Mhm.
and they were getting this kind of idea of what awakening is, and so it was good. It was it's a very strong community of what would you say, more interest in other spiritual things.
Yeah.
Because
Eclectic.
there's not much. There's nothing in the ego for awakening, and there's not really much. It's not like you get a big bang or a check.
Yeah.
Nothing,
Right.
nothing really changes, but yet everything changes. But there's no real, at least when you do past life regression, you get this experience,
Mhm.
and then you go, wow, I've had this experience.
Right.
Some payoff.
Yeah. So that, in other words, there's nothing kind of a specific package of content that you get to sort of write down or hang on your wall or write a book about or something. It's just presence.
Well, no, I do feel like the ego in the beginning, my ego, or my what I would call my motion of my ego, that momentum, would be like, wow, look at me, I'm awake. We should like me more.
In other words, your ego is kind of getting a buzz out of the fact.
Yeah, trying to grab hold of that and go, okay, well, wow, look at us now. And, but it obviously just didn't stick. It was kind of humorous. Okay, so whoop-de-doo.
Some people get quite carried away with that. I don't know if they're awake or not, but I mean, some people get really carried away with the notion that they are special and should be revered, and start adding suffixes to their names and whatnot.
Yeah.
So.
It
can be a pitfall. I've been reading this really cool book called Halfway Up the Mountain: The Error of Premature Claims to Enlightenment by Mariana Kaplan, and she kind of itemizes it in 500 pages of this book. Goes through all the different pitfalls that one can get into.
Well, that spiritual seeker, my biggest confirmation of awakening was, I think it was John that asked me. He said,
John Macy, our friend.
Yeah, he said, well, how are you with, do you feel like you need to be doing some things? Are you seeking?
Mm-hmm.
And I realized, no,
Yeah.
not seeking anymore.
Yeah.
And what a relief.
Yeah.
Because I was in agony my whole life seeking this thing, this wanting to have this realization. And, all the courses and all the meditating and all the discipline and all the stuff that I was doing. And it's like, all that energy is, that I was putting there is now available to me.
Yeah.
I don't no longer just, where am I going to go?
Plus all the money for all those courses.
Exactly.
But
where am I going to go? What am I, I don't have that looking for something anymore.
right. And that too is sometimes espoused as a prescription. Stop seeking.
Right.
And and then people think, all right, I'm giving up. I'm not going to seek anymore. But golly, is this all there is to it? I mean, I really wish we'd get back, but I'm not going to seek.
Yeah. And I've heard that too. Yeah.
Yeah.
And had I heard that now, before, I would have okay, well then I'll just stop meditating and I'll just stop looking for it.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, there's this little manipulation going on. It's like, well, then maybe this will work.
Yeah. Right. I mean, that in itself becomes a form of seeking.
Right.
I'm really not seeking. Boy, I'm so not seeking.
Yeah.
But obviously, you stopped seeking because you found.
Right.
And that's the time to stop seeking. Otherwise, seek if you feel like seeking.
Yeah.
Practice things, do things, meditate, do yoga. Whatever you feel inclined to do. And if and when you reach a stage at which that no longer feels appropriate, you'll know it. I'm not speaking of you specifically, but people in general will know it.
Yeah, they will, one way or the other. And
I just think it can be a misguidance kind of thing to sort of just as a blanket teaching say, okay, everybody, stop seeking, give up the search. That's appropriate at a certain stage, and there are in fact stages.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's that illusion that it's just around the corner.
Yeah.
And that is false.
Right.
It's not around the corner. It's
Right.
always right here.
Right.
Always now.
Yeah.
So in that sense, as long as there's that need or that grasping or that trying to meditate the next time because you're
Right.
going to get closer, then you're caught in that illusion.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, it's like letting go or just saying, well, I'm not going to seek anymore.
Mm-hmm.
The true meaning is just be.
Yeah.
And here you are.
Yeah, that's the other side of it, which is that one can get stuck in a rut where they're always chasing the carrot, always looking for what's around the corner, where with just a little bit of sort of turning back and settling into what's here now, they can be content. So it's kind of like so many other things. It's a paradox.
Yeah.
There's everything to be said for seeking and striving and being diligent about that. There's everything to be said for just sort of fully appreciating and living in the present moment.
Yeah.
And the two are not opposed to one another. You can be content and yet be doing things which will deepen your experience and deepen your knowledge and so on.
Yeah. Well, there's certainly a paradox, and that feeling of living with paradox is something you can, at least for me, can get used to.
Absolutely.
But it doesn't go away. It's still the paradox that it's like, oh, well, I could, do this stuff, or I could not do that stuff.
Yeah. I was listening to a lecture by Deepak Chopra the other day, and he quoted Nisargadatta as saying, the best measure of enlightenment is the degree to which you're comfortable with paradox, uncertainty, and ambiguity. I love that.
I like the phrase delightful confusion.
Yeah, that's a good one too.
Because you're delighted and you're blissful, and yet how could you possibly understand any of this? All of,
Mm-hmm.
what's awakening, what's life, how did all this get here? That's beyond the mind. The mind can't grasp that.
Yeah.
So it's always got to be that sense of the unknown or the mystery
Mm-hmm.
of life. And for me, embracing that mystery has become a real joy.
Yeah.
Not knowing,
Yeah.
not asking even questions at times,
Mhm.
just because I don't really care to know.
Right.
I just want to see what comes next.
Yeah. That's good.
So it's certainly the best entertainment in town. I highly recommend it.
Yeah. Huh.
Just maybe not do it the way I did it, but
No. People all have their ways of doing it. And, there's certainly plenty of options available for anybody who wants to sort of investigate more deeply into this kind of thing. I mean, there's
Yeah.
no end of books and courses and teachers and teachings. And I think, we just follow our hearts and seek out the thing which is most effective for us.
well,
One size does not fit all.
yeah, and it's certainly worth everything to have it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's been the biggest deal of, the highest ideal of every culture for thousands of years.
Yeah,
And yet, it's not like fireworks going off. It's not like, I mean, some people have that impression that if somebody is enlightened or awake, they couldn't walk into a coffee shop without blowing everybody away by their mere presence.
right.
Because and they must be 2 feet off the ground and just this awesome person.
Right.
And I don't think it always shows up like that.
And I've had conversations with some people that are very, very spiritual and have read all the books, and then they'll see me get angry over something,
Right.
and they go, "Oh, well, then that's not awakening,
Huh.
because you're supposed to just always be peaceful and blissful, but
Yeah.
still have a personality."
Have these people been people who've been into TM?
Yeah,
Well, boy, they never spent much time around Maharishi then.
I know. I mean, you
Because
still have
he
your,
used to really blow his stack.
yeah, you have your personality,
Yeah.
and however that reacts, it reacts. And I don't see that as a flaw. It's just the way you are.
Yeah.
Something happens, and you don't, you respond a certain way.
It's an emotion.
Yeah.
Right. And what you probably experience is that you don't stay angry for 3 days.
No, I mean,
You know?
there's no, that's suffering. That's true suffering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's that old saying in the Vedic literature again. It's like line on stone, line on water, line on sand, line on different substances. You make a line, and in some of them it really etches in deep and stays there.
Right.
Others it just goes away.
Right.
And from the enlightened person is supposed to be more like a line on air, where you can pass your arm through it. There is an impression, but no remnant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's hard for people to understand. I would say is that sense of, you're supposed to look a certain way, be a certain way,
Yeah.
be always blissful,
And
be
it's a
always-
traditional question. I mean, 5,000 years ago, Arjuna asked Lord Krishna, "What is an enlightened man like? How does he walk? How does he sit? How does he act?"
Yeah.
And and Krishna basically said he sits united. He didn't give any external criteria so much of that you could sort of use to authoritatively define it. It was more like more internal. The senses are not you're not attached and things like that. Not attached to the fruits of action and it's an inner condition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Both inner and outer, I suppose.
Yeah.
This is all
But everything is in the eye of the beholder, you know.
Yeah.
And so, you know, unless, you know, as Christ said, if you know, he often used to use the phrase, "Those who have the eyes to see it," you know.
Yeah. And what does that mean? You know, I know in the beginning days I was like asking people, what is it, and talking to all these people and sharing my experience, and now I don't really feel the need to do that anymore.
Huh.
There's no, it's like,
You felt like you need to run around and tell everybody about
yeah,
what you-
yeah. There's mostly because I was trying to like figure it out for me what
yeah,
happened,
yeah.
what happened to me, and now I rarely talk about it except when I'm here in Fairfield. Usually
Right.
I don't talk about it other
Where everybody
places.
talks about it all the time.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a common understanding, and it doesn't shake
Right.
things up. But in general, in my life, I mean, I don't talk to my kids about it. They ask me what death is like, and
Yeah.
I explain that to them.
Uh-huh. Well, maybe the novelty sort of wore off too. I mean, you kind of came to terms with it, adjusted to it. You got your own understanding sort of sorted out. And,
Yeah,
yeah. So it's not so you're not so obsessed with it as you were in the beginning.
yeah. I'm, what'd you say, anchored in it, I guess.
Yeah, more grounded in
Um,
it, settled.
And enjoying the unfolding. So the words start to break down. I notice a lot. You know, I can't quite pinpoint. It's kind of like I could say, "I'm awakened."
Mm-hmm.
Well, that would be true, except I'm not really here.
Yeah.
So there's just awakening,
Right.
and I was just, you know, this life for me was just added on to it.
Mm-hmm.
Is how it felt when I came back.
Yeah.
I was already there, and then there was like, oh well, let's add this
Mm-hmm.
experience of Doc Roberts. You know, let's see how it works through this vehicle.
This guy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Line from the Incredible String Band: "Light that is one, though the lamps be many."
Hmm. Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I sort of have that feeling now that I always get at about this point in the interview, where we could sit here and just continue to chit-chat like this for the next hour or two, but people might get a little bored after a while. It's all right, okay, these guys are going to say anything new? You know, unless
Someday.
unless you think of, you have anything in mind that we really ought to have covered that we haven't, maybe we should wrap it up.
Unless you want to get into a discussion of past lives and whether they really exist or not.
What do you know
Probably
about
not.
those? Well, that's an
I
interesting
had
topic.
another one of those dreams,
Mhm.
and in the dream, this voice, maybe not even a voice, a knowing came. It's like there aren't any past lives.
Hmm.
There's no such thing as past lives.
Hmm.
But it was in the sense of I continue
Yes,
from life to life,
right.
because from the perspective of the absolute consciousness, pure consciousness, there's, you know, a being is formed,
Mhm.
and they may pull all these various experiences. And that being comes into this life and remembers, you know, a time in Egypt or whatever.
Mhm.
But that wasn't him there.
Huh.
That was just a time in Egypt. So you pull all this together,
Hmm.
and you could say, oh, that was my past life. But
Yeah.
there's no my past life. There was a past life. And that shook me a lot because I always had that
Yeah.
concept ingrained. And then I realized the truth of it is it's the ego side of saying, oh well, I was a king in Egypt, or in this life I have this problem because last life, you know, this happened.
Mhm.
And when you pull the my out of it, and you just realize you're here with these experiences,
Mm.
you know, seem like they were some other time, but that wasn't me. But they all form who I am in this life, and probably set me up for certain experiences.
Huh.
But when I die, I'm gone. You know, Doc Roberts,
Yeah.
I'm done. I'm not going to be there in the next life figuring it all out again. Because there's only one thing, and that's pure consciousness.
Yeah. Well, you know, let me play devil's advocate to that. This is interesting the way you put it. There's only one thing, pure consciousness, but we do acknowledge manifest existence, and we live in it, you know, and we have a physical body. If we break our leg, we go and have that taken care of, and so on. And you know, many people say we also have sort of, there's said to be these different koshas or sheaths, which are like the Russian dolls, like subtler and subtler aspects of
Right.
our manifest existence. And the innermost one, close to but not exactly at the level of pure consciousness, is supposed to be the jiva, or the sort of the kernel or the soul or essence of what we are as a manifest expression. And I don't know, I guess you're saying that sort of individuated expression is completely like a drop into the ocean when one dies, and all the molecules get mingled with all the other molecules, and then maybe some evaporation takes place and more drops come out, and maybe it contains some of the original molecules from that first drop, but it's a totally unique drop. It's not like the same first drop that got evaporated and came out and formed another
Right.
cloud.
Right. Now I can't say. I mean, obviously, I don't. I don't know. I know
Yeah.
less now than I've ever known.
Right. So it's just based on this dream that you're sort of thinking of it. in
But
these
it was
terms.
like I know I can recognize that sense of shaking. That the whole me
Yeah.
starts to shake.
Uh-huh.
It's like something gets broken loose.
Yeah.
And for me, that resonated as truth.
Huh.
And I realized I didn't like it, but I realized that
Yeah.
that was my experience when I was in death
Yeah.
for 2 weeks and came back, or in pure consciousness
Yeah.
for 2 weeks.
But it's like you came back with a memory of your apartment and your books and your kids and your ex-wife and your business and all that stuff. You didn't come back as me. You came back as you. So there was something. And you could say it's just because of your particular nervous system and the impressions in your particular brain, which are eventually going to turn to dust, and then all that stuff will be gone. But there could also be, I'm postulating, a subtler structure which doesn't get destroyed when the body gets destroyed, and which actually retains those specific impressions in a sort of discrete way, and that subtle structure then goes and occupies another physical body, and so you get some kid that can play piano brilliantly at the age of 5, or speak German or something like that.
Right.
Where did that come from? I mean, maybe it just got drawn out of the ocean with a particular bucket of, okay, here's the Mozart experience. Now you can play like this, even though this particular soul, as an entity, never existed. I mean, didn't exist specifically before. But it could also be, it seems to me, that we're all sort of progressing as, I don't know. I'm starting.
Well,
to
I would like to think your way. That yes, we do continue from life to life.
Yeah.
This came along and just like, and I recognized that there's some truth there.
Yeah.
And probably it's a combination of both.
It could be one of those paradox things.
Yeah.
Knowledge is different in different states of consciousness. On one level, that's true. On one level, this is true. And even though they're paradoxically, opposed, they also, in the larger context, all fit happily together.
I mean, I do know that Doc Roberts, in this unique configuration, is not going to be here again.
No. I mean, you might be born as a woman next time if you're born again.
Right.
And, with maybe some proclivities from this life retained, but who knows? I mean, they say that there's 2 kinds of karma. There's prarabdha karma and sanchita karma. And prarabdha karma is supposed to be like this huge mountain range of karma. And sanchita is like supposed to be this bucket that we take from the mountain range when we take birth. And that's what kind of, motivates or animates this particular life. And but I don't know if we each have our own mountain range, or each have our own huge load of prarabdha karma, or if it's a kind of communal thing that we take a bucket from. It's all very speculative. I mean, in my mind at least, the people who have written books about this stuff and put it down as scripture, I don't know if they were just good speculators like we're doing now, or if they really knew it with some kind of certainty due to the depth of their insight. Don't know.
I don't know either. All I know is it's interesting getting used to not knowing.
Yeah.
Because before I always had to know.
Yeah.
Just quest.
It's
for
fun
knowledge.
to play with.
Yeah.
But if you expect to kind of resolve anything, and I mean, there are some people in this world that hang on so tightly to belief as though it were absolute truth. Belief, whether whether they're willing to blow themselves up for it or blow other people up, because they're so certain that this is the way it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would like to think, okay, well, I continue body to body. And as I hear so many people say, well, if I don't get it right this life, I'll just
Right.
get it right the next life.
Yeah.
And so kind of almost in a sense allows them to not be here.
Yeah. And there's also the whole thing of sort of justice and mercy, and if somebody is a mass murderer in this life, do they get off scot-free, or do they have to sort of face the consequences? And if a child is born with some terrible disease, how could there be a compassionate God who would allow that to happen? And isn't that the consequence of them being the mass murderer last time, and now, but I don't know, who knows? It's all just speculation.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure people listening to this have all played with these ideas before, and I guess all we're saying to conclude is just that you just can't be. Awakening is, in a way, it's not stepping into adamant certainty about things. It's adjusting to being comfortable with uncertainty.
Just being here now.
Just being.
That's it. And
Yeah.
nobody knows what's coming next.
Yeah.
So it's enjoying whatever comes next.
Yeah. Huh. Good. Well, it's a good time to stop because I'm getting too talkative, and
All
I
right.
don't like it when I talk with more than the guest does.
Right.
So thanks, Doc.
Yeah.
It's really been fun, and God willing, this camera that we were using for the first time will have worked, and we'll get a good interview out of this.
That'd be
And in
nice.
any case, you recorded it, so we'll have it in audio, if nothing else.
Yeah. Hopefully.
Yeah. So this has been Buddha at the Gas Pump. My guest has been Doc Roberts. Wasn't there some gunslinger or something named Doc Roberts? Or
Doc
Holliday, right. And you live in Durango,
Yeah, yeah.
And we will be doing one of these every week for the foreseeable futures, and there are about 30 of them now archived on batgap.com, and podcasts, YouTube channel, and all kinds of things you can do. So check that out, batgap.com, B-A-T-G-A-P, and we'll have Doc's page up shortly, and there'll be links to his business. But and you don't have a website about yourself; you just have your business.
I have a website, vocationalawakening.com, and I have a blog up there.
Cool.
So I talk about awakening, also talk about how to find your true vocation.
Oh, good. So we'll link to all that so people can read about it if they want to. So thanks, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.